Ms. Dunn, I understand you have something you wanted to state for the record.
Yes, I apologize. When I went through my government service earlier, I left off 4 months that I worked for the National Security Council in 1979
And
as a staff assistant.
on that note, I neglected to ask you about your...
And all of her sort of memory is to the best of her recollection.
Yes, this is to the best of my
extensive career.
recollection.
Yeah.
Sure, and we understand that. Thank you for clarifying. And on that note, I never asked you, where did you attend college?
I attended college at the University of Maryland.
And what year did you graduate?
I didn't.
And so was your time at the National Security Council, was that during college or?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Thank you. We left off during our last hour discussing your role in the Biden White House. Just quickly, you know, how often did you interact with President Biden during your time in the White House?
No. Again, this is an imprecise thing to discuss. You know, I would generally see the president, you know, 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes more. If there was a speech coming up, sometimes less.
And was that fairly consistent
And
throughout the administration?
Well, to the best of my recollection, it was fairly consistent. There were times when we were preparing for something major, again, where I would have a huge amount of contact with him. There were times when he was preparing for a foreign trip, I would have very little.
Do any times stand out to you where you had less access or where you spent less time with President Biden?
Yeah. To the best of my recollection, there are no times that really stand out. I was not as involved in national security policy as others were, though. So during intense national security times, I would have less contact.
You said, I think in your opening statement last hour with my minority colleagues, that press and communication strategy, that was sort of the bulk of your role in the White House. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair to characterize the bulk of my role as press and communications. But obviously, as a senior advisor, we all talked with each other.
Did you play a role in responding to what some might call blunders or gaffes made by President Biden during that time?
No, as I remember, the press and communications operations would have the end product of dealing with those, but a broader group would deal with that.
So you were involved?
Oh, I was involved, yes.
I believe you were not at the White House. You were not at the White House in March of 2022. Is that correct? Because you came back in May.
Again, I don't remember exactly when I was there. I was there for a 9-day period in March, either late February or early March. So I apologize, I don't remember exactly.
Were you at the White House when Russia invaded Ukraine on March 26th?
Let's see, I do not believe I was. But again, I apologize. That is a time when my memory is hazy for when I was in and when I was out. So.
I understand. I think you said you had some amount of interaction with White House staff, even during that hiatus, again, excluding the 9-day period where you were back. Soon after Russia invaded Ukraine, President Biden spoke at the Royal Castle in Warsaw, Poland. President Biden stated, "For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power." Do you recall that happening?
I remember the speech, yes.
Are you shocked by President Biden's remarks?
I don't remember being shocked by them, no.
Do you believe that President Biden knew he was saying or implying to call for the ousting of Putin?
No, I think my rule has always been that at the end of the day, presidents set the policy and presidents get to say these things.
Do you think it was an intentional statement?
I have no way of knowing that. I was not around that Poland trip at all, so.
And in your limited communications advising role, I think that's fair based on your testimony. Did you have any role in advising on the strategy for responding to these remarks?
No, I don't remember having any role around those particular remarks. And given that they were national security, I think the national security team would have taken the lead on that.
On May 23rd, 2022, speaking alongside the Japanese Prime Minister in Tokyo, former then President Biden was asked, "Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?" Biden responded, "Yes." The reporter responded surprised, "You are?" And President Biden stated, "That's the commitment we made." Were you consulted at all? Let's start here. You were in the White House again at this point on May 23rd, 2022.
I had returned to the White House by then.
Were you involved in any strategy or decisions otherwise related to the response to these comments by President Biden?
No, I do not remember being involved in those conversations. I think, again, I think those conversations were primarily out of the National Security Council, and that National Security press staff took the lead.
So do you know specifically who's in charge of that?
I don't remember who was in charge at the time, but at the end of the day, Jake Sullivan, who was our national security advisor.
Do you believe that President Biden knew what he was saying when he made this statement was at odds with longstanding U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity?
I believe President Biden, as president, was able to set U.S. policy and to say these things if he believed it was in the national interest.
Regardless of whether he was able to, do you think he knew what he was saying was at odds with longstanding U.S. policy?
I can't make that judgment. He certainly was well aware of what U.S. policy had been, having been chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, vice president and president.
Understanding you said you were not deeply involved in national security discussions, but had you ever been involved in a conversation with President Biden about strategic ambiguity or U.S.-Taiwan policy?
I do not remember being involved in a discussion with President Biden on U.S.-Taiwan policy or strategic ambiguity.
On June 20th, 2023, President Biden attended a fundraiser with California Governor Gavin Newsom. During the fundraiser, President Biden called Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. Sort of the same question, were you involved in any discussions or strategy for responding to these comments?
Let's see. As I recall, I was not on the trip. And again, it was primarily national security that had the lead in figuring out the response.
Do you believe that President Biden was in command of himself or his remarks when he called Xi Jinping a dictator?
I believe President Biden said what he meant to say.
So you believe that President Biden meant to call Xi Jinping a dictator?
I believe presidents say these things and that they get elected to say these things.
And similar question from the last one, had you been involved in any discussions with President Biden about whether Xi Jinping was a dictator or should be publicly called one?
I was not, to the best of my recollection, I was not in a discussion about that. And as I said earlier, I really didn't play a significant role in national security communications. I was aware of them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.